So, what was it about that character when you first read the script that said, "I've got to play this"?
I think the fact that she makes so many mistakes. I think that by that she is a trans woman, we never felt beholden to have her be some kind of a role model, or to be perfect, and because I think that that is a trap that we fall into a lot with representation, is we don't want to have a negative impact that like ripples across the community, and oh, so all trans people are this. And Laurel was very not that. She is 18, selfish, and a bad person. And I thought that was interesting, and I had never really gotten to do that before. And even frankly, more so than even the script and the character, I fell in love with the crew, and the director and writer, Brad Michael Elmore, is one of my dearest friends and was the first person really in Hollywood to really take a chance on me. And so I just fell in love with that whole project.
And that's what I liked about the character. For me, it was real. It
Yeah.
wasn't. It was just like, this is a person like
Yeah.
my students or any of the age who just
Yeah.
has problems like any other kid does. And there's vampire, so.
And that doesn't hurt either, does it? Yeah, no, not at all. It was so cool. That is, to this day, some of the most fun that I've ever had working on that film.
So, but you do a lot of other stuff creatively.
Yeah.
So how was so how's the acting feed the other parts of your creative, like the comic books, for example?
Yeah. Well, I think they're really two parts of the same picture, right? I am a storyteller in whatever way that I get to do that. I like to get to do that. I like acting because I like playing dress up, and I like getting to feel that and channel that with my body, and with writing. That sates my incessant need to be a control freak. No, but yeah, I mean, it's just provided me a new way to tell these stories and share this character who means so much to me, and to so many other people too. Having the opportunity to continue telling her story and bringing her into these new spaces is, of course, great in terms of trans representation, but I'm just also having a lot of fun. I feel like I'm back in like my playroom with my like brother, and we're playing action figures again, and getting to tell these stories with these iconic characters that we love.
It's interesting because I always like to ask questions about advice for students. It seems like maybe some of your advice for students might be breaking entry. Make sure it's still fun or passionate for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I am a firm believer of, well, less so now, I suppose, that I've done it. If you never work, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. That's not true. Work is work. But it helps, doesn't it? I am excited about what I'm doing. I'm excited to get to come to Comic-Con and talk with other creators. And I just had finished up my interviews at the DC booth, and my editor, Paul Kaminsky, was like, hey, so Mark and I were talking, and we have some ideas for absolute power. Can I pick your brain? Oh, we just got to talk, and it's so much fun because everyone who does this is such a fan of these characters and of these stories, and getting to be in a position where we decide what happens next, and the artists are also incredible, that the sky truly is the limit. And just trying to find new ways to interpret these characters and what happens next. It's so fun.
Sounds like you're also thinking that the most important thing is finding fellow collaborators that share your same vision or joy.
Yeah, it takes a village. Absolutely. I couldn't do what I do by myself. I need my editors and co-writers and artists and inkers and colorists and letterers, and everybody that goes into this makes this thing. And I think that is one of my favorite parts about comic book writing, is how collaborative it is. And the script is just one small part of that. And it's been so amazing to get to see how these books come together, and how holding them in my hand is so different from the way that I picture it in my head. And getting to actually see that finished final copy, there's nothing like it.
Any hope of turning, let's say, a comic book, one of your comic books now or in the future, into a film that you write and direct?
Oh, well, I've gone from TV to comics, so I would kind of like to complete that circle and kind of go back. So, yeah, I would love to see more Dreamer in the live action stuff. I think that's so cool, and DC's going in such a fun direction with it, and I think that this is a new beginning for them, and I would be honored if I got to be a part of that in some way.
What was it about, you first read the script, what was it about that, like, I need to play this part?
So, I think just the story itself, because a lot of it parallels my own family's immigration story. And because I was a child refugee, I think it was such an effort to actually follow them from childhood to adulthood, because not a lot of that is really seen when we see stories of refugees. It's mostly documentaries. It's never in a form that you automatically get engulfed in and you connect with it emotionally from beginning to the end. So for me, I thought it resonated with me a lot. But then also because I'm from, at the time, from Sudan, I think it was, I don't know how to describe it, but it was a really, really heavy responsibility to carry that and to tell that story from my, I guess, point of view in that sense, and my perspective, and tying my story in with the story of the character. I felt was a very delicate thing to handle.
Which to me made it feel much more real.
Yes, yes, yes. And I also like thinking about how it was portrayed specifically by South Sudanese people from that place, and people have gone through those experiences. So I thought that was a very deliberate thing for the producers to do. And we were very grateful that we get to tell our own story from, I guess, from our perspective.
Now, you did Abbott Elementary episode. So, I love the show. I love actually going inter-city schools, not explored in television. Another thing where it's great to see new characters and real faces that people don't usually see. But how fun was that?
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. And I remember just doing the character. It was my mom. I did one take, and that was it. I was like, yeah, I think I got this. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
All right, so we have a lot of students breaking the industry. They're graduating. One of mine just graduated. What advice do you give them to try to get into the industry today?
I would say to not think about it in terms of like short-term goals. Definitely think about this as an expansive career into something that you will get to create things that will sustain and last for generations. And so because of that, it's I always talk about building those relationships that you need to build, having things that you want to achieve, as well as also reaching out to people so that you can have mentors and people that can also champion you as well.
What was it about Inside Out that made you want to be a part of the story?
Well, Pete Docter, the creator, talked about how, as a father, he was very interested that his daughter, when she was little, would show up when people came over for dinner, and she'd do a tap dance and be like, "Hello, here I am," and she was full of joy. But then when she turned 11, it seemed to go away, and she got very remote, and she would put her hair across her face, and she got very shy. And as a father, he was heartbroken and said, "What happened to my daughter's joy? I want to go inside and find out." So while the external is about the life of a child, of a 13-year-old girl, or in this case 11, Joy is the main character, and she's a parent. She's trying to protect her child, and in the first movie, keep her kid happy, and needs to learn about herself in order to help her kid.
What was the biggest challenge for then the second film, trying to expand? Because obviously puberty does change a lot of things. So what was it for you adding that, adding the many more different emotions?
Well, at Pixar, if you have an idea for a sequel, it has to be sequel-worthy, meaning they have to decide that this is a deep enough idea that needs to be thought about and told a story told about. So Kelsey Mann, the director, had this idea from his own childhood of being a teenager and how anxiety can really take over. Originally, and then I came on as the writer and totally related to that. I was an anxious teenager. I'm an anxious adult, and originally it was just anxiety who was arriving, and then we had the idea to bring in more emotions, and then we had to prove to Pete Docter why that's what's possible in the world. You have world rules, right? You have to show where were they been, but it really felt real to that age and that moment of your life when you can get overwhelmed by your emotions and you suddenly feel like a different person. And so what it all comes down to is, does this feel true? Does this feel authentic? As an artist, are you bringing something very vulnerable about yourself to this work? And then what's interesting is the more specific you get, the more it ripples out into universal. And a lot of writers get mixed up about that. They think you want to stay universal and archetypical to reach a lot of people, but in fact you want to do the opposite, and you want to get as specific as possible about your experience, and then people will connect and relate and feel like you see them.
Is that something you would go a little further with that? Because I was always told, like, if you're not willing to look in the mirror, you can't be a writer or any kind of artist. Is that so when you get the younger artists, you're just saying just keep focused on yourself, look inward to tell your story.
Yeah, I mean, every great piece of art, be it writing a movie, painting, whatever, has that vulnerability of the artist being the brave one. On my podcast, we call it the lava. You kind of walk into something that feels like it might burn you up, but in fact, it's the thing that will set you free and connect you to other people. But it's hard to do. I mean, when you're writing, I always want to push to something that makes me feel very uncomfortable, almost embarrassed to admit, feel very, very vulnerable to bring that out and put it out into the world on a piece of paper. That's when you know you're right on it. And your brain will do a lot of things to keep you from it because it feels very dangerous. Survival instinct kicks in. It'll start telling you, oh, that's cliche, that's too obvious, all those judgment words. Sometimes when I work with students, I'm like, if your brain starts saying that, you better go do a writing exercise and go right at it because there might be something bubbling underneath.
Because you're teaching screenwriting, which is what I love about this. Is what I do. How has it helped you in your own artwork, though? Seeing what their struggles, maybe your students, translated when you write your own scripts.
Well, I mean, for Inside Out, we had Riley's crew, who were a bunch of 13, 14, 15, and one 16-year-old girl, and they would watch what we were doing when we got to a screening, and they would give us notes about what felt real, what didn't feel real. I knew what it felt like to be a parent. I knew what it felt like to have anxiety. I was an anxious 13-year-old girl, but that was a while ago. We needed to make sure it still was what they were experiencing. They live in a different world than I lived in, and they were really honest and very brave.
Black Panther, Indigenous world's not well represented. What was the process for you kind of visualizing it?
Well, to be honest with you, I was really excited about working on that film because up until then, I love sci-fi. I love working on sci-fi, but to be honest with you, there's kind of a convention to sci-fi. So working on Black Panther was really exciting for me. Hannah Beekler, the production designer, and I, it was the first time we actually created a whole world from scratch. And not only create a whole world from scratch, but literally a world that's untouched by colonialism. So one of the lot of things we studied was actually what it's like to be ultra rich and have complete royalty. I was specifically tasked with designing a lot of the Wakanda royalty and whatnot. And I continued that for Wakanda forever as well. So a lot of the thoughts were like, how would you create something for a royal family and continue with that? There's a lot of stuff we did that was on the cutting room floor. Some of my favorite scenes was designing actually Shuri's bedroom itself. And I wish it made it on the screen because we did some amazing things for it. But one of the things I'm very proud of, obviously, is Shuri's lab. So
now, not technically a real world, Lord of the Rings first season, but kind of because Tolkien was so detailed, and Tolkien did create a wonderful world that really does feel real. What was that? So was it a different process for you developing that, or was it more freeing because you could actually create things not existing in the real world?
It was very, I'll be honest with you. I am a Lord of the Rings fan, but I didn't know it as well. But I was very lucky on that production because I actually got to share an office with one of my heroes, which is John Howe, world famous art director who art directed the first three Lord of the Rings movies. He was also one of the Tolkien, I believe the Tolkien Enterprises like chief illustrators and whatnot. So getting the inside knowledge on designing that world was really fascinating because there was really a specific Tolkien style that I wasn't aware of until sharing an office with John. So that was fun. I loved working on that mostly because I love world building, and on that we use a lot of new technology. Specifically, I used a game engine called Unreal Engine, where I actually got to build out whole, literal entire worlds in digital that you could actually travel around with a game engine and whatnot.
That's fantastic. We talked a little before. You're a teacher, so what is it? What's the most important lesson for them when they want to break into the industry? Because a lot of my students don't know how to break into this kind of part of the industry.
Well, I think it's very important. It's very easy to lose sight of when you're trying to get into the industry that you just want to get a job. But the truth of the matter is, and I even tell my students now, it's like what's more important than getting the first job is you got to remember why you got into this whole industry is to be an artist. So don't forget the stories that you want to tell. And I think a lot of us forget about that because you're always worried about getting that first job. But there's a certain point where you do get the job, and then after about 10 years in, you're like, what else am I supposed to be doing? And you can find that there's not a lot of meaning behind it, unfortunately. So I do recommend everyone do follow through. That and the best advice I've probably ever gotten was that there's definitely a feast or famine, and if you can survive through the famine, you'll do well in the industry. So
what was about All We Carry made you want to tell that story?
Well, I first met the family when I was covering the migrant caravan as a journalist in 2018, and I became really close to the family when I was covering their story crossing Mexico, and when there was a big plot twist in their story and they end up essentially in a mansion while they're waiting for their asylum hearing, I thought there was an opportunity to cover the topic not just about fleeing and violence, but also about healing and this finding community in an unexpected place, which I think is a part of the story that we need.
Yeah, and I feel like the immigration story, and especially in the United States, is always about the other side of it. It's not saying what it does for the immigrants and what it does for us, the American citizens. It helps us.
Exactly. There's so much focus on the border, which is important, and there's so much focus on tragedy, but there's also a lot of joy and a lot of opportunity, and we try to really balance the two things together in our film.
In your research, was anything that really surprised you? Something like, I did not know this.
I mean, the experience of being detained in the U.S. is something I didn't know a lot about, and something that's really surprising that most people don't know is that the experience, depending where you are in the country, where you end up by luck or bad luck of the draw being detained while you're waiting for your asylum hearing or released, could drastically change the outcome. So someone with the same asylum case might be denied if they end up in a detention center in Louisiana versus if they end up in a detention center here in San Diego, which is where one of the members of our the family that we followed was, and then they were released and able to go to Seattle.
I did not know that. Okay, you're also an educator, though. What was that? Yeah. So how is that? What is the process for you? How do you enjoy teaching? What is your favorite part of that?
So I started an education nonprofit with a friend, actually, when I was in high school, so many years ago, and we ran it for 5 years together. Well, 5 years in college and then another 5 years, so 10 years total. And my favorite part about that was storytelling. And that's why I switched my education to becoming a journalist and then a filmmaker, because we had this saying, which I don't remember who said this originally, it wasn't us, but you can't hate anyone whose story you know. So that was really important to us when we were creating this curriculum about empathy, education, and connecting students all over the world to share each other's stories. And so and then now, as a professional storyteller, I definitely have an educator's lens in the editing room and making sure, does this all make sense? Are we able to follow it? But of course, with a strong priority on tugging on people's heartstrings throughout.
Your memoir. I do want to talk about your memoir. Very personal.
Yeah.
And what were the biggest challenges of how much do you want to expose of yourself, or did you I'm just putting everything out there, no holding back?
Yeah, so my memoir is called Everything I Learned. I learned in a Chinese restaurant, and it's about growing up in Detroit in the 80s. Very tough time for the city. Auto industry struggling, crack cocaine, AIDS. I knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18, so it was a really tough time period. In terms of deciding what to include and what not to include, I relied on my editor a lot for that, because when you're telling your own personal story, you don't really necessarily know what that arc is, right? And so it was surprising to me that there were some stories that I thought would definitely make it into the final, but she didn't think it worked. But I was okay with that because I trusted her in terms of her ability to help me tell my story.
What was the most difficult part of writing the memoir?
The most difficult part, probably finding an agent, actually. I mean, the writing part is just fun. I mean, because you get to go down memory lane, and even the difficult parts sometimes are necessary to go through, right? Like to sort of reflect when you're older. But yeah, the publishing side, I think, is the most difficult and the most challenging, I think.
I'd like to touch on that. It's very interesting you say that. So, since obviously you're going back memory lane, did you feel like you learned a lot when you think about, I didn't realize this at the time, or, when I was younger, now I should have known that. Did it actually help you mature now, even today?
Yeah, I mean, the way I sort of coped with growing up in the inner city of Detroit was to just move on, right? That's the best strategy, to just sort of forget all the troubles, right? And I think as a human being, it's okay to sort of forget things. But I think when you're writing a memoir, it's actually the exact opposite. You actually have to pick at those scabs. And so it was hard for me because, I was reliving moments which I thought I'd moved on from, that I thought, I don't need to address this. And maybe I don't need to as a human being. I can get on with my life. But if you're writing a book, where people are hoping to read and learn something from you, they're going to expect to get into those darker moments, right? And those more troublesome moments, because I feel like that's what they're hoping to learn from. And so if you do want to write a book, a memoir that you're trying to sell to a big publisher, yeah, you're going to have to be willing to open up a bit more.
What was it about that project that kind of drew you in?
It's Mindhunter. I think that the character I got to play, real person, incredible story, and one that is alive in my memory. And so to get to walk in that woman's shoes was an intense experience. It was also an honor. So a really tough woman whose child is part of those who go missing, one of those who goes missing. And she spearheads the campaign to get the story out about the missing children of Atlanta. And, she crosses paths with our lead and makes him question not so much the mission, but how he's going about the mission, and whether or not he's being mindful and aware of the community that he's dealing with. And it was wonderful. It was just really wonderful.
Now, I'm assuming a lot of research has to go into it. Yeah, so what was that must have been a difficult process, actually learning deeper what actually is happening in the world?
It was, but it was, it's life, so when life is lifing, you have to be brave and just be as true to it as you can.
Which actually is good to know, because always the last question is with students, what advice do you have for students trying to break into the industry today as compared to when you broke it?
Don't think of it as breaking in. Think of it as sort of knocking incessantly on a door that creeps open a little at a time. Plan for the long haul. Plan, because there are the lightning strikes, and you were discovered walking down the street. That doesn't happen for everyone. And if it doesn't happen for you in 2 years, don't give up, or it was not what you wanted to do in the first place.
But if you're really talented and you keep going at it, some door is going to open. Someone, because I know you, even like you want a young collaborator, you're going to look for somebody who's like that.
Yeah, that's exactly. A door will open. You just have to stick with it and keep knocking.
And I have to, my final question is, how was the Comic-Con experience? How is it looking out at these fans that are really excited?
It's a lot of people, and everybody is so excited, and you got all the costumes, and I mean, it's cool. I don't quite have the word for it, because it's just so much. It's so much to take in, but it's really cool. It's really cool.
It's fun being around thousands of people that are just loving True, and they're having so much passion and fun, and you want to hear from you. They want to, they're dying to hear from you and all the other guests, wonderful guests here.
It's kind of amazing. It's just like, you want to know, you want to talk to me? Okay. I just want to know about you.
So we are going to talk about Euphoria. There's a lot going on in Euphoria. Genre-wise, you've got typical high school.
Yeah.
You got some drugs and sex. What is the challenge in editing that, to trying to keep that all kind of grounded in reality and not overshadowing, each other?
Right. It is a kind of delicate balance of storytelling, because it is a lot of kind of dark comedy in a way. So it's kind of funny. It's kind of sexy, but it's kind of dark. And I think a lot of us actually, on the editing team, we kind of tap into our own personal experiences. So, for instance, my own parents struggled with drug addiction, and so for me to go in and edit these scenes, where they're struggling, where it's a family who's struggling with drug addiction, we can bring our own personal experiences into it. And actually, the panel that I'm speaking on later is about diversity and inclusion, and there's some incredible gay, and queer stories in Euphoria, and when I was in high school, I fell in love with my best friend, and there's a storyline like that in the second season where, Cal, the father, when he was growing up, he fell in love with his best friend. And so we bring a lot of our own lives into the work, and that's how we make it authentic, and that's how we make it really personal and really powerful, really emotional.
One of the things I love about Euphoria, especially with those kind of storylines, it's not preachy. It's just like these are all normal kids. It doesn't matter, but they're all going through the same thing, and they just and that's why it's narratively, it's not kind of like lectures. It's like, no, these are normal children, all with anxiety and all these same issues we all have.
Exactly, and it's interesting, when the shows come out, and you look on Twitter, and I just get tons and tons of messages from kids who are like, I went through this same thing, or my brother went through the same thing, or my sister, went through the same thing, and they really feel like the show reflects a kind of truth back to them, and it's nice to see what you've experienced in storytelling, and it's nice to be able to, because it makes you feel less alone. You can connect with these stories and be like, somebody gets it, somebody knows what I've been through.
So what was the most challenging episode to edit?
Definitely. So the second season, I edited episode 5, which is what they call the Rue Runs episode. And, there's a really intense, moment in the house where they basically have an intervention, and then Rue goes on this crazy adventure, and that episode, it's almost every genre, of storytelling in one. The last scene, with the drug dealer Lori is almost like a horror movie. The opening scene is almost like a documentary, and then there's this crazy, police chase, which is sort of like comedic and scary and funny, and all things kind of rolled into one. And so that was kind of the most challenging aspect of it. Was like, it literally, I had to dive into almost every kind of genre of editing and filmmaking and storytelling, and make it all feel cohesive and feel like one story.
Yeah, I was hoping you would answer the question for that episode, because it is my favorite episode of it. But the end scene was one of the most tense things I've ever seen, where you know what's about to happen to Rue if she doesn't get out. Like, this is how Trapped happened. So for you, was there any kind of challenge, like how far to push that, how far to pull it back, how much fear do we want her to experience?
No, absolutely, and that's always this challenge, when you're editing, is there is that push and pull, It's like, how much do you slow things down, how much do you speed things up, and we do a lot of play on Euphoria in the editing. What we do a lot of is we do what we call alts. So it's like, hey, let's, take, that scene and let's do a different beginning, and then, hey, what if we slowed the whole thing down? Hey, what if we sped the whole thing up? And so we try all these different alts and we experiment, and we find like, oh, this is the one that creates the most emotion. This is the one that just rips your heart out when you're watching it. This is the one that's so scary. And so it's that kind of creative play that I think really makes the show special.
It must make it easy too when Zendaya is awesome and gives you great takes.
Oh my gosh, yes, she's brilliant, she's amazing, and she's so sweet. She's so great to work with. Like, I can give her an example of how brilliant she is. In that episode, episode 5, she came in that opening scene where it's kind of like a documentary. They shot so many takes after takes after takes. I mean, it was this huge, amazing shoot. And she came in and she was like, hey, and she had shot this scene probably 2 months earlier. And she was like, there's this one line where I said this one thing. She had done this little bit of improv, this little bit of tweak on a line. And I was like, and she's like, can we try that? And I was like, yes. And I went right to the line and pulled it in. And it was like, and that was her only note, on that section. And it was just so, it's just to show that she's not just an amazing actress, but she's really an amazing storyteller, right? She can think like back to that one moment, and so she's really great to work with,
I'm going to ask, we have students in the audience, to give them a homework assignment. All the students in the audience that watch this, if they were to study one film or television show for editing, what would you want them to study?
Oh my gosh, that's a really interesting question. I mean, is it terrible to say Euphoria?
No, actually, because that's an example of mixing a lot of things in the same episode. Yeah,
because I mean, I tell you, the care and the energy and the time that we put into literally every single cut in Euphoria, and especially if you're into music, we spend so much time tweaking the music and making the edit absolutely perfectly reflect. Every single lyric matches perfectly, and so I mean, I don't know. Euphoria is some of the, most cared about editing I have ever worked. And obviously I worked on it, but,
I would recommend it too. It's my favorite episode. So, yeah.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
I know, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks.